In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a data entry widget in Python. So we'll create a canvas, we'll set up some fields, create some buttons, and then we'll be able to see whether we can input data and then click on these buttons to submit information. So a simple form essentially that we'll create using Python code. So let's jump right in. Let me begin. Let me go ahead and give it a comment here first. So this is going to be our data entry form. Let me go ahead and save this first. Let's go navigate to our data files folder, and this is under data files, and let's go to our Python folder. Perfect. So I'm going to say my form.py. Great. Next, let's bring up our tkinter. So from tkinter import asterisk, and next we're going to set up the fields of this widget. So I'm going to say fields, and my first field is going to be, let's say, first name, and then I'm going to have my next field name, which is the last name, and a couple other fields, just random fields that I'm making as I go along. So let's do job, and let's say the country. So once I've set up the fields, next I'm going to do the definition to fetch these fields or the entries, and then for entry in entries, and specify the field text, and then of course tell Python to print as well. So within this I'm going to have field equals entry to be in list 0, and then my text would be in entry 1, and then I'm going to get the text, right? So I'm going to use the get method here and tell Python to print. So I'm going to have it print, our modulo goes in here, and then I'm going to say modulo s, and of course our field and text. So once we've set up our entries, defined these entries, next I'm going to use the definition for making the form. So I'm going to say make form, and this will be root and then fields, and get my entries in here first. Entries equals blank list, and then do the for loop. So for a field in fields, and next I'm going to specify the row, for instance, the entries, and use the pack method, and then the append method as well within this loop. So let's go ahead and do the row first. So I'm going to say row frame within root, and let's do another one, say lab equals our labels basically, and I want these in row. Specify the width, let's say equals 15, and the text equals field, and I'm going to use the anchor string. So anchor equals w, and next our entry equals entry. This also goes in row, and then use our pack method, row.pack. Side equals top, use the fill equals x, and some pad x equals 5, and the pad y also equals 5. Next to the label or lab.pack, and tell it to use the left side. Similarly for my ent.pack, I'm going to tell it to use the right side, and be able to expand also, otherwise the form is going to be fixed. So we're going to say expand yes, and then fill equals x. And finally for my entries dot append, I'm going to use the field and the ent, and the field and ent in fact goes in their own parentheses. And once I'm done, simply do a return entries. Great. So here's the definition for the make form. Next I'm going to do the if name equals the main, then to the root equals tk, ents equals make form, and use the root and the fields. Let me scroll down so you can see. And then I'm going to use the bind method for the root dot bind and do the return in here and use the lambda event and e equals our entries, ents. And once Python does this, we're going to tell it to fetch e. Great. Here comes our buttons. So next I'm going to use b1 for the button, specify the root, and then the text, something like show, give it a command, equals lambda e equals ents that we used earlier, and then use the fetch again, fetch e. Great. Let's do the other one. So b1 dot pack, and this is going to be on the left side, so side equals left. Give it some padding, pad x equals 5, and pad y also equals 5, so we stay consistent, right, with the sizes. And here's our b2, which is our second button, so do the same pretty much code again for button 2. So it'll be root and then my text equals, and I'm going to use a quit text to place it on the button, and then command equals root dot quit, and use the pack method with the b2 also, and side equals left, and then of course our padding. So pad x equals 5, and pad y equals 5 also. And once we're done, simply do the main loop, root dot main loop. Great. So let's verify. Let's go on top here. So this is going to be our data entry form that we just created. We set up the following fields. We set up the first name, last name, job, and country. Next, we did the definition to fetch those entries. Then we created the form itself and placed those entries within that form. And finally, we used the bind method for those buttons on the form. Great. Let me save this and run it. Let's go to line 24. What do we miss here? So syntax is, of course, this should be an equal, right? So instead of 2 dashes, this is going to be 2 equal signs. Save it, run it again. All right, let's see. And of course, our syntax errors. Let me correct this. So this will be an if. It has to be a space. If not, Python, of course, is not going to execute this code. And once again, the good thing about these editors is that give you color coding, right? So earlier I had this, so notice this was in white, and Python doesn't recognize what to do with this if statement. Okay, so to make sure that our conditions work properly, we need to use the correct syntax. So let's save it, run it, and this time Python executes the code and gives us another error. Let's take a look at what that is, and this time it's in line 26. And of course, we also need to correct the equal sign. Okay, so just these simple mistakes. And as a programmer and a developer, this is common because once you're typing code, sometimes if you're not a good typist, it's easier to make these mistakes. But the good thing about these editors is that they take you directly to that point where you can troubleshoot and then fix those things quickly. Okay, so let's run it again, and this time it works perfectly. Bring this in the center. So here's our fields. We have our first name, we have the last name, and we have the job and the country. And of course our 2 buttons, show and quit, that we created towards the end of our code. So let's test it out, see whether Python displays the output or not. So I'm just gonna type a name here. I'm gonna say Chris, Portman, and the job is programmer, and the country's USA. And if I click on show, and let's take a look at line 29, which is right here. This is our fetch. So it's fetching properly. Let's go to line 10. And of course, the reason why it displays an error because we need to correct the spelling. It should say field. So F-I-E-L-D. Much better. Save it, run it again. There we go. Let's test it out one more time. So Chris Portman, and the job is programmer. And of course our country is US. Click show. Perfect. So this time Python displays the correct output and gives me the first name, last name, programmer, and the country. If I click on quit, our data entry widget disappears. If I run the code again, it brings it up again. And similarly, I can enter information on this form. So a powerful way in Python where you can create these simple forms which later can be displayed on the e-commerce site or any program that you're making. So I hope this helps. Practice working with these simple forms so that you get more comfortable creating these data entry forms. Let's move to the next lesson.